the three townships are of three different sizes.
Yeah.
But if all the departments are represented in each of them, that's a little surprising because a very small town, but it suits people. How is it? What
Yeah.
do they do?
I mean, that is an issue. Because even if, like the smallest one has 3,000 population, but it has a major chunk of departments. Now, in this whole institutional reform, there is a proposal to, if there are two adjacent townships which are, small, to club them together. But a small township doesn't want to get clubbed with a big township. So it is a flaw in the, delineation of townships in the first place. And now they've become independent entities, they don't want to kind of merge. So, but then I think this whole proposal is going on to sort of rationalize this whole thing. Like we also keep talking about these wards and, rationalizing ward boundaries and things, but then there's always, it's not an easy thing. So it's the same there. But yeah, then it's like this one size fits all kind of thing. Yeah, the administration is like a cookie cutter thing. Everybody gets township. Have township will have this official there. Yeah. So some of them are hugely overworked. Like we have this Lantaya township, which is the one with the 7 lakh population. Yeah. That has the same number of people as something like this one, which has 3,000.
I was wondering, are there other foreign organizations which are out there helping to standardize or creating these action plans for townships?
Yeah.
And is
No,
there
not,
any?
not for the townships.
Not for townships.
Not for the townships as yet. But UN Habitat might get into this whole process. But so far, nobody's really got into the townships except IHS. Because it's also, it's not that you can just go out there and, do these township action plans. There's this whole capacity building of these people that has to go on, looking at institutions, what they're all about. And so we ended up, we got into this whole thing of doing township action plans. But in actual effect, it was a whole institutional analysis and that we went through to see how it would work and things like that, along with behavior and behavioral analysis and what have you. So where it's never happened before, and there's been no kind of planning. Yeah, it's all top down. So it's.
Well, I know there are organizations which are engaging municipalities.
In the rural areas, yes. In the rural areas, FAO is doing quite a lot of work. But in urban townships, no. There is JICA, which is helping with the structure planning exercise. There is Asian Development Bank, which is doing these environmental plans for cities. Yeah. So at a city-wide level, yes. But at a sub-city level, there's nobody at the moment.
Please use the mic.
So I wanted to understand if you saw, any sort of ability to shape an agenda, particularly with the YCDC people that you were training. I mean, they're not there yet, and there are simple plans, but did they have that ability to do so? The second was, you said that you had to deal with people working in silos. And did you have any instances where these silos were broken and people came together, apart from, the obvious example you mentioned of people wearing T-shirts and something happened there? And my third question is whether you see any sort of coordination amongst donors on particular issues, particularly around urbanization, for example, at all happening?
Well, I think I'll answer your last question, and then we'll go into the example of Shwepita, where you can see then how this action plan thing actually happened on the ground. So how this, silos sort of got broken. There is this donor coordination, yes, is beginning to happen now, because the thing is Myanmar has just opened up too. So I think, and also from the side of the government, the rural and the agricultural was the big agenda for donors till now. Till last year, donors were not talking about urban at all. Yeah? But now you have, except for Asian Development Bank and JICA who are giving loans. Yeah? But now you do have donors coming in. You have, for instance, DFID, then you have Save the Children, and you have a number of other organizations who are, and the Dutch, who are looking at, like the Dutch have this big project for cities in delta regions. Yeah, so Yangon is part of that. So that is now beginning to happen. Yes, and they also have, I think, since 2014, they've got a kind of donor community forum, which they do meet and exchange, what they're doing and things like that. But I attended one of those because you're also, somehow associated with UN Habitat at that time. But then the whole thing was that, at that time, urban was not really on anybody's radar. And it was basically disaster management, climate change. Climate change is big there in urban, rural, everything. And then, of course, this stuff of peace building. All the UN agencies are into the peace building efforts, whether it's the Rohingyas or the other ethnic groups which are there. Yeah. So, in fact, the Indian government has given a huge amount of, aid to Myanmar. I think 5 billion USD. And that's basically for developing all the border areas around India. So it's for health, education, roads, an airport, and leading right up to the port, Sitwe. So everybody is there.
How balanced is the effort at capacity building and this type of soft expenditure as opposed to what is actually happening in terms of hard? And let me tell you, having worked for many years, donors, especially in a situation where you are heavily donor driven, the only thing that they can really spend their money and pass to it is a lot of capacity building and etc. And 90% of it actually doesn't work, I would say. And maybe I'm being provocative. What happens often is that the people get trained, do all this, or it doesn't even last because nothing really happens in the ground. Because you don't have either the resources or the preconditions for doing this right sort of thing. It's not an academic question. There's a very interesting article recently by Branko Milanovic in The Guardian where he basically says the OBOR model, why might be the way that actually you get something achieved, which is the Chinese model as opposed to what most of the Western agencies. So from your point of view being there, do you think, I can say I've been guilty that I found for a long time in East Asia, Indonesia, that we should have been cut our capacity building and the soft planning type of things by 75% and doing much more to make sure that things actually happen on the ground in terms of physical expenditure. So from your perspective, what is that? Do you think the balance is right, or is right now because it's such a darling, everybody wants to pour money into it?
No, I don't think the balance will ever be right. And this question of do you do capacity building or do you do just hard work, I think the two have to be linked. And like you pointed out, that you have to have the resources to make things happen. Like for instance, looking even at these township action plans. Yeah. Now, if immediately they did a presentation in front of the mayor and regional government and things like that. So the knee-jerk reaction was that fine, okay, now develop project proposals and you get your money. So they got money for immediate things like cleaning drains and things, which created a lot of enthusiasm in the township. Yeah. So they thought, yeah, fine. I mean, this is, we did this, we presented and things. But then, these were the pilots. Yeah. Now, do you think every township action plan would be presented in front of the mayor and the regional government? No. Yeah. So this whole thing of this resourcing of what happens afterwards, like they develop some practical proposals. Yeah. So it has to be followed up by resources. So then only it can become kind of sustainable. Yeah. Otherwise, yeah, of course, I mean, I think you had answers in your questions itself that it doesn't work. Now, in the urban sector in Myanmar, for instance, in the whole country there are 40 qualified urban planners, 40. Yeah? And their capacity is forever being built because every donor who comes wants to have workshops for them. And so these people, they don't have time to work. And who's doing the work? It's the consultants. Yeah? And these people's capacity is being built. Yeah? So, and capacity not to handle consultants, but to do all other things. Yeah? But then, and they're not able to handle these consultants at all. Some of them produce rubbish, I'm sorry to say, and just leave. Yeah? But that's because what you need capacity for is to make somebody else work. If you are, short of manpower, yeah, you should know how to deal with contracts and these kind of things, which aren't taught in any of these things. Yeah? Which is what we are going to be doing next. So yeah, I mean, yes, you got a right question.
Thank you for your talk. I'm sorry if I missed this, but how successful is is this participation in terms of influence from the public on the government or any activities? And what's the is it legally binding? I mean, does this participation has legal weightage? For example, in India, in so many things, participation does happen, but people have this view that no one really listens. This happens. This is about many departments I've heard. So, is the outcome of those meetings legally binding on the officials, or it's just just out of general
well,
feedback?
yes and no, because you know, like here also, you have some people in positions of power who believe in participation and who will take, suggestions and things like that. But it's not mandatory. Yeah? So it's the same there.
So that means that tomorrow, as and when the country grows, corruption can anyway push aside all this participation. Is that correct?
It can tokenize it.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I think tokenization is worse than throwing it out.
Both of these questions actually remind me of a line by Tagore, who went to Yangon and said that Burma has been colonized twice, first by the British and then by the Indians, before the Indians were all thrown out by the military. I just kind of feel that all these donor organizations coming here, aren't they sort of imposing a different vein of thought or a planning methodology on the people, or is there a sufficient trust on also taking in people's opinions, and does it really come out when the whole process is done and dusted?
Well, I think this is just the beginning, and the Myanmar people have a tremendous tradition of participation. Myanmar people also have institutions like the monasteries, yeah, who go out for every crisis to help people. And of course, in Myanmar is famous for people coming together and challenging the government, whether it's the students or the monks or anybody else. Yeah? So there is a huge amount of energy in civil society and in citizens as such, yeah, which I think is a very, very great thing. There isn't apathy at this point, yeah. So that is the worst thing for participation. But if this energy can be tapped, I think it can become a great participatory thing. Right now, it isn't. No.
Maybe you could continue,
Yeah.
finish the presentation, and then we go for more questions, if it's okay.
Okay, this is what this Shepita town presented in front of the mayor. It was in Myanmar language, but oops. Okay, so this is what this is as it is, just an English translation of what they did. So they went through preparing a township profile. So a lot of questions came up over here because the general administration department had a population figure in each of the townships, which is much lower than the census figure. Yeah. And why is that? Because the general administration only counted those who have citizenship cards, residence cards. Yeah. Which is a huge issue, and that's what people from the states are fighting for, these residence cards. And the census counted everybody, so the census population was much higher. So the squatters got left out. So then there was this discussion around it and things like this. So just to put this thing together and get to know what their township was, this was of course a summary of what they did. So that itself they actually didn't know. Then of course the land use thing, and then they were sort of talking to each other on how to read maps, what does this density map mean, that it actually represents people. So it was among themselves, this whole thing. Then they did a very simple SWOT analysis. The principles of SWOT analysis definitely were followed, and it is robust enough that it was. So then you can see the strengths, opportunities, and stuff like that, which is there. The threats is the flooding, political environment, national and regional. The political environment is this top-down thing which they were talking about, rapid population growth, and all these various things that you can read. And then they actually went out there and saw what the problems were, took pictures at the places where the problem was most apparent and things, and they went together. So that was kind of a shared understanding of things. So this garbage thing. The other thing which generated a lot of discussions in Shripitar was this particular situation, where all the industries had all this material dumped outside. And why? Because the Yangon City Development Council, which is supposed to do solid waste management for households and other establishments, can do solid waste management for industries only on request and on payment. They pay, and only when they request, then they remove the solid waste. So around all the industrial estates, you will see this kind of thing there, because nobody is requesting. Yeah. So they're not lifting. So then the need. That's why they then from the township then, which they didn't know earlier, and they figured it out, and then now they immediately, even during the workshop, they started taking action to see that it changes and stuff like that. Then they developed a vision, which is industrial township with good living environment. Yeah. So and they also had a lot of proposals on how to do it. Then the objectives. Clean industry and job creation, safe and secure life and all, because there's in Shripitar it's one of the few townships where there is crime, kind of petty kind of crime. So that was a public communication center, because they said they don't know what is happening, what are the various things there, and so in their understanding, that is what was. So then you say, okay, these are your strategies, then why do you want them? What will change if you have this? So it was this whole thing of the expected impacts. And yeah, for all the various things that they had proposed. and then the action plan, which was, they were looking at resources, from where the resources will come. Yeah. So the solar system is not actually the solar system, it is the solar energy. It is the solar energy which is being promoted by a particular ministry. Yeah. So, and which is the institution, and how will it work? That it's YCDC working with the community. Here it is through the PPP mode. Then here you have the Ministry of Transport that comes in, and there's developers. So all this, how will this happen? So this also took a lot of thinking on their part. It looks very simple on this, but the whole discussion around it was pretty intense. Yeah. So, and then the time-bound actions. Like if you have a drainage system, then what you do in the 1 year, 2 to 5 years, and more than 5 years. Yeah. So the idea that you actually needed to do a drainage survey and plan and things like that was something which happened then, because none of them were used to this whole thing. So I think that way, like what needs to precede what, and things like that. So kind of a shared understanding of things, because there was not here but in Insane, there was a drainage plan being prepared. So every time the citizens went to the township office, they said, yeah, first we need to have a drainage plan, then we'll make improvements. So everybody was fed up. So here they realized that yes, you do need to have some sort of drainage plan, but you can do quick things like, you know, proper sluice gates at the outlet points and all to make immediate improvements. So that was the idea of this. And then the sources of funding. Here, for the presentation, they took just 2 sectors and detailed them out. And yeah. So it's the responsibility and collaboration arrangements and things like that. So all this, actually they sort of presented it back among to the representatives of the 10 households, to the ward administrators and the representatives of 10 households, which means that 1/10 of the whole town got to know about all these things, and which is then we realized that it's not really difficult to do if you have that even at that scale. At least inform and get some kind of consultation going is better than having nothing and a good starting point. So they, in Insane, they came up with the idea that you should decentralize all this to the ward level, where the ward administrator should do this and bring it up and stuff like that. Yeah, so that's it. Just an indication of what happened here.
I think we had one question that I stopped in the back, and then yes.
Prior to what you said earlier, you were talking
music.
Thank you for the presentation. Actually, you were mentioning earlier about this area, where there were a lot of Buddhists living. This one of the townships, I suppose.
Sorry, I can't hear you.
This one place that you were talking about, this one of the townships which is dominant. We were talking about participation. That was the issue that we were talking about. And you talked about, like, for instance, a lot of Buddhists living in one certain area in one of the townships, right? So I was wondering, there's a lot in this all planning and everything, the insights, there's a lot, you say you're talking about a lot of energy coming in from the community as such. But these planning and everything, how much of the socio-cultural factors are taken into account? And, because you're trying to build these townships with certain, agendas in there, and what goes on is then how is that becomes part of the planning as such, the sociocultural factors that are there in creating these townships into urban areas and such. Thank you.
Thanks for the question. Actually, Myanmar is a Buddhist majority country, and the next is Christians, and then other odd, but then definitely 90% Buddhist. Yeah? And this is a Buddhist-dominated area. And the previous regime, the military regime, what they did was that they actually evicted people from the central city and sort of resettled them into the townships. And every time they resettled, were going to resettle people, then they had a monastery or a Buddhist shrine or something like that. Yeah? So there was this kind of sort of earning brownie points with God kind of stuff going on with the military regime. That so there are in all these townships there are major shrines which are created, but now the new government is not doing that, because it's trying to project itself as a secular state and not a Buddhist state. That is one thing. Second thing is that being a Buddhist majority, state, but then here it's not religion really, but then it's these ethnic identities which need to come into the whole thing. And this was not part of this process at all, to look at the ethnic minorities. But they do tend to cluster together, and if there are certain practices which need to go into them, yeah, certainly that's a relevant thing which would be done, yeah, which can be done.
Especially with people migrating into these areas now, right?
Yeah.
More will happen as
Yeah.
time.
No, like for instance, after the cyclone Nargis, all those people who came from the Ayarwadi area, they were of a certain ethnic group, yeah. And they tend to stay together, they tend to cluster together. And so here in Yangon, the Mon identity is dominant of the Mon thing. But then you also have the Chins, the Kachins, and everybody is in Yangon, yeah. So it is really a multicultural place there. Yeah? So, like for instance, in the case of Insane, a lot of trade and commerce is in the hands of Indians. Yeah? The wholesale trade is so you have people who are from Tamil origin, from Punjab, and things like that. And so in each of these places, but they are Myanmar people. Yeah? So there are these identities, and how they can be included within a secular state framework which says they are not going to look at these identities separately and give, like, what the deliverables of the state should go equally to everybody is the question that whether you should or should not. Yeah. Thanks for the question.
What you presented, I can see to a great extent that it's an effort at engagement of the citizenry. But I mean, I'm still trying to see how far along did you get along on the, let's say, the planning or even the preliminary part of it, the trade-offs, the interaction between the spatial and the economic, the demographics, and there are many things, because when you go into actual, often what you have, you engage the citizenry, you energize them. But then when it comes down to actual seeking their inputs, in the end, if they are totally not familiarized with some of the basic choices to be made in the planning process, we found, having tried that, even issues, it doesn't have to be very technically sophisticated. It could be simple things of willingness to pay type of sort of area, discussion, not necessarily, or do you want to choose this versus this, the type of deliberative democracy type of choices in budgeting. Did you get into any of that?
In a minor way, because I can give you an example that in the case of Dala Township, where drinking water is a huge issue with all the salinity happening in the water. So you can't really use that water anymore, groundwater anymore. Yeah. So there, people said that we can live with bad roads, we can live with flooding, but we want water to be there. Yeah. So please first sort out the water, and then they actually started making demands on the township, saying that we don't want to listen to your budgets for other things. Yeah? You sort out the water problem first, which means that it is really a felt need and a priority with citizens, and that is actually what they try to do. Yeah. Because of the there's no connectivity with the other part of Yangon. Now the first thing that's going to happen with this bridge coming across the river will be a big water pipeline which comes into Dala to bring in fresh water. And then right now what happens is that they get tanker supply in what they call water kiosks. And so more number of water kiosks, and so stuff like that. So so it did end up like 1 year later I did a review of what actually happened after doing this thing. So this negotiation process it's going on in Dala, it's going on in Insane, but not in Shwepitar. Yeah. In Dala, people were very particular about this water thing. Yeah, and they're still at it. And then the elected representatives, they're also very much, with the water issue and pushing it at every level. Yeah? So that's an example that having come to know of various things like, okay, what is planned, what is the budget and things like that, they started negotiating that this is what we want, so please put your money there and not in other places. So that's a nice example. In the case of Insane, I just mentioned that the circle railway line is going to be given to Japanese private initiative for setting up enterprises at stations which can then pay for the improvement of the railway. Now these railway stations are also used for people to sell vegetables and things like that. So there is a kind of a movement against this, that giving off these station areas to those big, FDI kind of enterprise things, and they say that you make a market for us. Yeah. So that is, and now there is a serious consideration of incorporation of that local market function into whatever they are doing. Yeah. So these are two, real instances that I came across of citizens beginning to negotiate because of this process. Yeah.
So, is there a focus on real estate under the TAP? Because the real estate market in Yangon specifically is pretty highly inflated, to put it mildly. So you don't get rooms for below $400 a month in Yangon. This is perfectly understandable because you do have a lot of foreign companies coming in. But is it the same for the local population as well? Are rent prices as high? And because there have been a sufficient number of people who have moved in to the townships from the cities. So how does that work out? And is there a focus on your part or IHS's part?
Yeah, rents are very high. So again, Shwepitar, which has the maximum number of renters and squatters, because it's an industrial township, yeah, there it did come up as one of the concerns, yeah, of what you do with the rents. And that is, Shwepitar is also where the government is building what they call affordable rental housing, which is not affordable to these people who rent out rooms in, squatter areas and things like that, yeah. And the level of indebtedness is very high to private money lenders. Some of them are Indians actually, the money lenders, who just for people to make ends meet on a day-to-day basis. So there's a huge amount of poverty and vulnerability that goes with this. Around this thing, like it's the formal real estate that's gone up, but also the informal then starts mimicking what's happening in the the formal system, yeah. And then plus the townships are still not empowered enough, or they don't have any decision-making process, because the Department of Urban and Housing Development, yeah, DUHD as it is called, yeah, that has lands in different townships, and then they are allocating it for PPP projects, where that is happening. Then the Department of Industries also has lands where they are putting in industries, irrespective of what the township people want, and especially this kind of gated communities, and then this PPP mode affordable housing that is being built, yeah, is bringing in other people, and especially with the improvement of infrastructure, bringing in people from outside the townships to stay in those places, yeah. But then the people in Shupita township, for instance, they cannot afford to live there. So that is the kind of play. So they did discuss it, but they didn't have any way of, they couldn't figure out how they would deal with it, and especially because then the township budget has to go to provide infrastructure to these things. Yeah, they're just told that they have to provide the infrastructure. So that part is still, yeah, top down. Yeah.
Hi, I had a question about conflict and contestations of citizens regarding real estate and shared property. What would be a better way for them to contest? Would it be through the monastery, or perhaps as individuals? Because most of the time these committees are made up of executive personnel. So how would it work? What's the mechanism of resolving conflict in such cases?
Well, actually, what's happening in these townships to a very large extent is farmers selling out land, yeah, to somebody who then builds huts or houses or whatever, or makes layouts which are illegal, because you have to have the process for conversion of agriculture to non-agriculture is pretty difficult officially, yeah. So, but then nobody converts, like here as well. You see, it's the same kind of situation, yeah. So have land will sell kind of situation, but there have been protests, yeah, and there have been a lot of conflicts as well when people are evicted, yeah, from different kinds of lands, and there've been all sorts of the army called in to restore law and order or whatever, and all that kind of stuff. That goes on quite a lot, yeah. And then it's also, but then there is this whole thing. The mindset is of this kind of dividing line that these are illegal migrants and these are legal, just because of that identity paper, yeah. So the people without the identity paper, the citizenship card, which is there, yeah, have absolutely no rights at all. And so the normal citizens also consider that, but why should they have anything, that kind of thing, which is what the National League for Democracy was banking on. And one of the first things that when the Chief Minister of Yangon took office, yeah, he is actually from a construction company, and he's an appointee. Yeah. One of the first things he announced is that there will be no evictions, yeah, until we do a proper count of people who are homeless and jobless. Yeah. So, so at the moment there's a kind of a moratorium, yeah, on this whole thing, and this was also one of the election promises of the National League for Democracy. So let's see whether it's a game changer or this kind of thing goes on.
Any of these people were in the picture politicians?
Politician? Yeah.
Yeah?
No, not politician. This guy. This guy is a committee member.
Yeah.
And this woman is a committee. So they are elected.
This is the 1 in 10 or the next level up?
These are the township level committees.
The township level committee. And that's immediately elected by these representatives going up. Is that the way, or is it like an entire city, entire township sort of votes? Entire ward votes in them?
Yeah, the ward picks up people for the committees, and there is a kind of a short list of like each ward representative, and then from among those, they have this kind of committee of elders. So there are 5 designated elders, who then look at all their, their CVs or whatever, and they shortlist from that. So that's how it is. So level 1 is elected, level 2 is by the elders.
So is the question that came up earlier about vision. I'm just wondering whether you found any difference between these kinds of people who were in your workshop, in your groups, the people who came up through some kind of elected process, and the bureaucrats, the officials, or whoever were part of the process. I mean, not in terms of technical expertise or things of that sort, but purely in terms of the way they approach the problem. Did the elected representatives have a different approach to the issues?
They did, because what they were talking about is the problems on the ground. Yeah, and in general, the elected representatives were much more vocal. The women were the most vocal. The women elected members were the most vocal in putting forward their priorities of the people. Because this woman, for instance, she was one of the people who was dialoguing with everybody and taking everything forward and all that. So, through the translator, I just sort of asked her that what gives her this kind of concern about this whole thing. She said, because I have to go and answer to the people. Yeah, these guys, they have to answer to the boss in the regional government. Yeah, and they get their salaries. Yeah, I don't get a salary. Yeah, but I have to answer to those people. That was her thing.
One of the projects that you showed earlier, and there was some discussion, I'm wondering whether it's the same thing, there was a proposal for migrant hostels or something of that sort in that long list of projects that you put together.
Yeah.
Now, is that something that came out of a group like this, or was that one of the things that was sort of top-down foisted on this particular township?
No, there are hostels for garment industry working women. Yeah, which the Association of Garment Industry Employees gets assistance from the government for. Yeah, from the industries department, but they are not so many. But here this was a proposal because they felt that if there were hostels, then they wouldn't go into renting these rooms in the squatter areas, which were environmentally very, very poor and quite insecure in terms of they could be demolished anytime. So that was the view, that it was their proposal. Yeah.
And in that sense, these migrant people who are coming in, are these people with quote unquote cards that you were talking about? Are they seen as legitimate migrants coming into for legitimate purposes as opposed to the ones that you said which didn't have these residence cards?
Well, it's a little bit like China. If your employer says that you are full-time employed with that, not as a contract person, but on a regular salary, then they can sponsor you for getting this card. Yeah. So otherwise, it's this kind of these the ward administrators, they promise that we'll get you your identity cards, and it's always at a cost. Things like that. So a person selling noodles on the street, yeah, who's come as a migrant, would have a difficult time getting the identity card because for a resident, that residence card.
But these are all people from Myanmar and from other regions of Myanmar.
Yeah.
But can they be from other townships in and around Yangon? I mean,
yes, there are. There's a lot of movement between townships as well.
Okay.
But this registration is at township level.
So you could have one person from Dalan moving here and not having a card and therefore not being able to access certain services.
So they have a national identity card, and along with the national identity card, you also have to have a residence, which gives you an address. So if you have an address in that township, then you are eligible to have access to services like health and education and all that.
And these migrant hostels they were thinking of would be people with those residence permits, would be limited for access for people?
I don't know, it wasn't discussed.
It wasn't discussed in that sense. Broadly, is this a big issue in terms of, is there a sense in these townships, because these seem to be largish places, at least the ones that you picked up, a few 100,000 people.
Yeah.
So, and these are not, quote unquote, easily distinguishable as outsiders from what you're telling me. So, is this an issue that is sort of the people talk about, that people agitate people's minds? Because in China there is a clear migrant, non-migrant.
Yeah.
It's part of the discourse. Is it as much part of the discourse here in Yangon?
It's not very much part of the discourse, and my take on this is that people, as individuals, are not used to protesting or demanding things. Yeah, so they make do with things till they can, and it's only when something like evictions happen, yeah, some extreme event, then they come together as a group and demand all sorts of things, but not otherwise. Because, I think the whole thing is that they've come for earning a living or whatever in Yangon, so better stay quiet and do that, and that's it. So it's also the whole psyche, and it's also that they get a lot of assistance from the monasteries. Because you can walk into a monastery, get free food, you can, there are monastery schools where your kids can go to if you can't go to the state school and things like that. So it's not as though they're completely deprived of services. The housing is an issue, yes. Land and housing is the major issue there now.
You don't need a card for that if you are in an informal market.
Sorry?
In informal market, you wouldn't need a card.
No, you don't need for informal market.
No. You wouldn't need to sort of rent.
No, but then you have all this rent-seeking behavior of protection and things like that, which of course goes on. Like the ward administrators are the ones who, sort of, quote-unquote, allow people to settle, allow people to rent out places and things. Like everywhere, I think. It's the same kind of human behavior that you find.
So, when you're responding to Anupam, when you spoke about these around stations, they were organizing to demand that the existing um, sort of vendor spaces be preserved or some alternative be provided, who would be the agents lead? I mean, through what organizations would they sort of protest, and to whom would they make that claim? Would they make the claim to these town
They
committees
make the
or
claim to the railways. To the railways.
to the railways?
Yeah.
Because it's their land and they're giving out the contract in
Yeah.
that sense. And who would be these groups which would actually try and make these claims?
Who would be the?
Is it like a union or a association of?
There is an association. I don't know how formal it is, whether it's registered or not. I didn't find that out. But you read these things happening you read it in the newspapers and things that these are the protests that are going on, and this is what is happening, and they're protesting against this for this purpose. But how robust their organizations are, or are they coming together as a group of vendors just to fight this, that I don't really know.
What happens, I mean, so functions like transport or things that are sort of citywide are all centralized in a sense, or is there the township doesn't really get into those kind of things?
Well,
I'm trying to understand how the coordination
like it is
happens.
Here, that you have some roads and some transport which is at the the national level things, the national highways and the big things. Then you have the regional. The YCDC is looking at transport as well, and then the townships are looking within the neighborhoods, roads and culverts and things like that.
IPT, like licensed, the things like auto rickshaws or.
They're there in huge numbers.
And who would license them?
YCDC.
YCDC would license them.
And then the township offices are also represented by
It's sort of hybrid because YCDC is sort of, the township offices are coming under the YCDC in a sense.
Yeah, in this case.
So so some of these integration issues are easier than.
In the other places, except for Yangon and Naypyidaw and Mandalay, the municipalities are also under the General Administration Department.
In the beginning of the presentation, you had highlighted 6 rural areas around an urban area. So do the rural areas have a different mechanism and process of participatory involvement, or is it the exact same?
Yeah, I mean this you must appreciate happened only in these townships, the 3 pilot townships. Yeah, there is no mechanism in place in urban or rural at the moment. There are these structures which are there. Those come under the Rural Development Department, yeah, and General Administration. So actually, even though like for instance in Dala, yeah, part of the township is urban, the rest of the township is rural. Yeah, so the rural part of the township should not even get water from YCDC, but in practice they do extend services. Yeah. But to all these surrounding townships, they do give water, they do drainage and things like that. But strictly speaking, it should be the Rural Development Department which should do that. And but then in terms of these participatory things, I think there's a lot of work which is happening in rural areas, yeah, much more than urban. And it's kind of building on tradition quite a lot.
Is this the gender mix that you would see in?
It is not a gender mix that you would see in townships. The elected representatives are, a lot of them are women, yeah, but the officers are mostly male. But then in the planning unit of YCDC, you have a lot of women. The township the executives are all males, and no women there. But in the YCDC main office, you see a lot of women.
How does that matter? Is gender a big thing in
It's not. I mean, I don't think it's a country which discriminates much where gender thing is concerned. But I think there's still, there are certain perceptions about certain professions which women go into. Yeah? Teaching and medicine and stuff like that. Yeah, much more than like administration or stuff like that. Railways and things like that. This is, the other, there are two women who are from the YCDC office and one which is from the Ministry of Construction. Yeah? There's only one elected person, the rest are the township officers.
So there is no woman township official in this picture.
There's very
Two YCDC, one from the central ministry and one elected.
in this particular.
In this picture, sorry.
No more question? So thank you so much, Manashri, for this presentation and discussion, and I would like to invite you to join us for the next workshop that will be last Tuesday of June. Thank you again, and have a good evening, everyone. Thank you again.
Thank you very much for having me, Christine
Thank
and
you.
Partho and everyone here.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure to be here. Thank you.